series called Way of the Cross. So if you got your Bibles, go to Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be looking at a passage here shortly. If you didn't bring a Bible, that's okay. There should be one in the pew rack in front of you. And if you go to page 825, you will find Matthew chapter 26. We've talked about the way of the cross and the high price that it costs to walk this way of the cross. There's a personal cost. We talked about, Rob Basham did a great job last week talking about the loneliness that's often associated with the way of the cross. And today I want to talk to you about that this way can be an unfair way. It can feel unjust. And have you ever had one of those moments where you say out loud, "It's not fair. That's just not right." Or maybe you don't verbally say it, but you feel it inside. You ever had one of those moments? I don't think there's a person who hasn't. But this is something that it just arises a lot. I was in New York City several months ago. Trina and I were there. We got there a few days early. Had some meetings there, and some friends told us, "Here's the places you can go." And we were first day looking to grab lunch, and there's this food court in the basement of a Grand Central Station. So we go down there, and there's all kinds of options. We're walking around and kind of checking it all out. And we find this little pizza joint tucked away in the corner of this basement. And, New York pizza, it's got a reputation. We got to have it. So we go to this corner. We place our order. Trina places her order. I order a slice of pepperoni pizza, which, by the way, important information, it was $1 more per slice of pepperoni than cheese pizza. Okay, so it's $1 more to get pepperoni, but it's worth it. So I get my slice of pizza, and I look at it, and immediately I have this, if you could read my thought bubble, which I'm really glad you can't all the time, but if you could read my thought bubble, you would have read me saying, "That's not right," because there was 2 slices of pepperoni on that slice of pizza. And it was thinly sliced. And so right away, I'm doing the math. Slice of cheese pizza, it's $1 less, $1 more for pepperoni. So each piece of that thinly sliced pepperoni is going to cost me 50 cents. Okay? And then the sense of injustice rises even more within me because I look and I see in the glass case another slice of pizza, and it has 7 slices of pepperoni on it. So I'm doing the math, and it's 14 cents per slice of pepperoni on that slice of pizza, and it just doesn't feel fair. And I'm not saying any of this out loud because it's just a slice of pizza, but inside I am troubled. This is bugging me because it's not fair. And you've had your moments as well. In fact, young kids, they have this innate sense of justice that's deposited in them, right? From the youngest of age, they have this. When you're putting, if you have kids or you've raised kids, and you're putting, a younger child to bed earlier than an older child, you know that you're going to hear as they maybe say down the hallway, "That's not fair. Why do they get a stay up and I have to go to bed?" And there's this complaint of injustice that rings in your house. Or maybe you're passing out dinner and you've put the portions of food on the plate and you're putting it on the table, and your kids, if they haven't done this already, in their mind they're thinking, "I want to make sure I get a fair portion of the stuff I like, and I want a fair portion of the stuff I don't like. Because I don't want too much of this, and I want more of this." And when your kids grow up, it's not fair when the coach doesn't give them the playing time they feel like they deserve. It's not fair. When the ref makes that call, if you're watching basketball last night, when that call was made to end that one game, people are saying, "Not fair." If you're the ref, you're saying, "It's not fair." As bottles are being thrown at you, and maybe parents are treating you unjustly, and it just sort of escalates. The older we get, we have this inner barometer for fairness, and it goes off often when we encounter injustice. And of course, there's the small things that are unfair. Then there's the big ones. There's like poverty and homelessness, and working a job and doing the same work and getting paid less than someone you're working right next to. And then what about affordable housing, and what about racism? What about all the big injustices in our world, and something that's not right. And friends, when it comes to the way of the cross, being associated with Jesus sometimes brings with it injustice. like when Trina and I were just recently traveling in the Muslim world, and we're having breakfast with an Arab Christian leader. And he's talking to us about what life is like for him as a leader in the nation in which he serves. He's spent some time and been interviewed rather aggressively in some secret police offices. He talked about his family. He's got this bright young boy he's a handsome young man, and he's done great in school, went to university, studying medicine, dream of being a doctor, goes to med school, graduates at the top of his class. I mean, this is the kind of kid you want in a hospital. This is the kind of kid that you're hoping is if you have to go to the hospital, you want him working on you. Top of his class. And when he applies for residency, not one hospital in his country will take him. Why? Because his dad is a leader, a Christian leader, and the name has been blacklisted. It's not right. That's not fair. What do you do when you're treated unjustly? What's the right response when you encounter injustice? What's the right way to respond to, perhaps as you're a Christ follower, you being treated differently or rudely or in an unjust way because of your association with Jesus? And I want to kind of get at that question and attempt to answer by looking at, Matthew chapter 26. So if you got your Bibles, open there. I want to read on page 825, beginning in verse 47, where Jesus is betrayed and arrested. And then we're going to look at the trial that Jesus has with Pilate as we answer that question. What's our response to injustice and to when things come across us that we just would say it's not fair? Verse 47, and even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor, Judas, had given them a prearranged signal. You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. So Judas came straight to Jesus. Greetings, Rabbi, he exclaimed, and he gave him the kiss. Jesus said, my friend, go ahead and do what you have come for. Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him, but one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. Put away your sword, Jesus told him. Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now? This unnamed person who unsheathed the sword, Luke's gospel, John's gospel tell us that it's Peter. You know, Peter, the one who made promises to Jesus about being his defender, that he wouldn't disown him, that he wouldn't desert him. And Peter said to me, even Jesus, even if I have to die with you, I'm your guy. You can count on me. And it seems like Peter is holding his end of the bargain here. Because here's this arrest, and it's happening at night. The religious leaders, they realize that they can't do this during the day because of the crowds. Everywhere Jesus goes, there's a crowd. There's crowds of people. And if they try to arrest him, the crowds, it's going to be a riot. They're going to turn on him. Turn on them. And so they do it at night. They need someone to give them access to Jesus, and that's where Judas comes in. And so here this is happening, and it's a tragedy. It's unjust. This arrest that's happening, this betrayal that's taking place at night. And so Peter, he's just stepping in. He's doing what he's promised, and he slashes off this servant's ear. And Jesus, he tells Peter to put away his sword. Which is fascinating because Jesus is about to encounter this incredible injustice. I mean, this is the beginning of it all. He's going to be arrested. He's going to have so many trials. The trials are going to be held at night. That's against Jewish law. It should be during the day. There's all this, his execution. It's all such an injustice. And yet Jesus tells Peter to put away the sword, and that those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And here we get our first response to what do we do when life treats us unfairly, we face injustice. It's simply this: you can't fix injustice with injustice. You can't fix injustice with injustice. I mean, we tell this to our kids right from the earliest days when they're in the playground. Some kid shoves you, don't shove them back. I mean, on the basketball court, it's always the second shove that gets called foul, right? We tell this to people. I mean, we tell this to our kids at the earliest of age. No, you can't do this. But how often does this take place? We try to fix injustice with injustice, and really, there's one of the best examples of how this is modeled for us is in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the days of when civil rights were being pursued, when racism. I mean, this was one of our major national sins. When African Americans were being treated so brutally, and not as a second-class citizen or even a third-class, the fifth-class citizen, they're just treated so inhumanely. And as Dr. King is pursuing justice, he takes the approach of nonviolent protest. And by the way, there were some in the African American community that would disagree with him. In fact, there were some riots taking place from the minority point of view. And Chris Wallace from CBS News was doing an interview with Dr. King. And Wallace starts asking about the riots and starts asking about his approach of nonviolent protest. And this is what Dr. King says. He says, the limitation of riots, moral questions aside, is that they cannot win and their participants know it. Hence, rioting is not revolutionary, but reactionary, because it invites defeat. It involves an emotional catharsis, and it will be followed by a sense of futility. Here's what Dr. King is saying. He's saying that the riots, and by the way, he would also say that the riots that's the language of the unheard. But the rioting, actually, it's not revolutionary, it's reactionary. And can we just say this? When you get payback, there's something emotionally satisfying about that, isn't it? I mean, you make that post and fire that verbal barrage or something, there's something you just feel, yeah, I got my piece out. Or I got my swings in. What Dr. King says, there's this emotional cathartic moment that feels good, but in the end, it's futility. It doesn't get the job done. You cannot fix injustice with injustice because all it does is perpetuate violence. It perpetuates pain. There's another king. His name was David. In Psalm 7, David writes this, Lord my God, I take refuge in you. Save and deliver me from all who pursue me, or they will tear me apart like a lion and rip me to pieces with no one to rescue me. Lord my God, if I have done this and there is guilt on my hands, if I have repaid my ally with evil or without cause have robbed my foe, then let my enemy pursue and overtake me. Let him trample my life to the ground and make me sleep in the dust. This is what David is saying. Lord, there are people out there and they want to shred me. They want to shred me. And Lord, if I got it coming to me, then let it happen. Let there be justice. I don't feel like that would be justice, but if I'm wrong, then let them just trample me. And then David goes on and he says this, arise, Lord, in your anger. Rise up against the rage of my enemies. Awake, my God, decree justice. Let the assembled peoples gather around you while you sit enthroned over them on high. Let the Lord judge the peoples. Vindicate me, Lord, according to my righteousness, according to my integrity, O Most High. Bring to an end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous secure. You, the righteous God who probes minds and hearts. David is saying, look, God, there's people who want to shred me. And if I need to be shredded because that means justice is served, then let it happen. I don't think that's the case. I think I've kept my integrity. And so, Lord, vindicate me. How many times did King David have the opportunity to take justice in his own hands? But he refused. In the cave with Saul, his friends were saying, this is the moment. God's brought Saul before you. He doesn't know you're here. You're hiding in here, and now you can take his life. And David refuses. He refuses to fix injustice with injustice. Yet how many times have we perpetuated violence? How many times have we unsheathed our sword? And how many times has Jesus said and whispered, put it back. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. It's this idea, it's letting a just God being our defender. Yet Miroslav Volf would say this. Volf says, the practice of nonviolence requires a belief in divine vengeance. And so many of the world's problems today would be solved if people believed in the fact that there is a God who judges justly and that we can trust him to put things right in the end. Friends, what do when we face injustice? What do we do when following after Jesus invites unfair treatment? What do we do when life's not fair? Well, one thing we do know, we can't fix injustice with injustice. But let's keep going with the story here because there's more. Let's look at the story of Jesus before Pilate, chapter 27. You might just need to turn a page here. I want to pick it up in verse 11. Verse 11 of chapter 27 says, "Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. 'Are you the king of the Jews?' the governor asked him. Jesus replied, 'You have said it.' But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. 'Don't you hear all these charges they're bringing against you?' Pilate demanded. But Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. Now, it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner to the crowd, anyone they wanted. This year, there was a notorious prisoner, a man named Barabbas. As the crowds gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, 'Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?' He knew very well that the religious leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy. And just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message: 'Leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night.' Meanwhile, the leading priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So the governor asked again, 'Which of these two do you want me to release to you?' The crowd shouted back, 'Barabbas.' Pilate responded, 'Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?' And they shouted back, 'Crucify him.' 'Why?' Pilate demanded. 'What crime has he committed?' But the mob roared even louder, 'Crucify him.' Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, 'I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours.' And all the people yelled back, 'We will take responsibility for his death, we and our children.' So Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified." So here's Jesus standing with Pilate. And Pilate knows he's innocent. Pilate knows that it's envy that's got Jesus there. The Jews, they can't sentence anyone to death. They need the Romans to step in here and make this happen. And they know that it's all rooted in envy. And Pilate is trying to kind of wiggle his way out of this situation. So he's looking for exit ramps here. And one of the exit ramps he chooses is this tradition of bringing a criminal forward that this notorious criminal, this murderer named Barabbas. I'll bring him out. I'll put him and Jesus together. We'll let the crowd choose, and surely they will choose Jesus. I mean, he's innocent. The crowd knows this, and they don't want to release a notorious, criminal out in the streets. But the crowds are being whipped up, and as the crowds are being whipped up, Pilate's even getting a note from his wife saying, "Don't do anything. This guy's innocent. She's had a dream." And yet, while he's reading that note, the crowds are now shouting that Barabbas be spared. And Pilate's got another problem on his hand. This is classic. When we don't deal with something head on and we try and work around it, we actually end up creating more problems. Because Barabbas is going to be released onto the streets of Jerusalem, and he's a notorious criminal. So now Pilate's got another problem. He's got a criminal on the loose in Jerusalem that he's very aware of. He's trying to wiggle his way out of this, but he can't get out of this. There's a riot developing. He knows that his job is probably on the line here if he doesn't satisfy the crowds and doesn't stop this uproar. This is not going to help his job if there's a riot. So he orders a basin of water. He dips his hands in the basin of water and symbolically washes his hands and says, "The responsibility for this man's death is not going to be on me, it's on you." And the crowds are saying, "Yeah, let it be on me and on our kids." And then Pilate sends Jesus to the cross. Friends, you can't fix injustice with injustice. But on the flip side, you can't wash your hands of injustice. You can't just wash your hands. Well, that's not my responsibility. There's nothing I can do. And oftentimes we wash our hands because there might be a personal cost to our position. See, God's positioned each and every one of us perfectly, right wherever. There's a time for everything. He's chosen this time in history for you to live. And he's put you in that job. He's put you in that neighborhood. You know what? There's all kinds of injustices in the world. And you're not going to be able to fix them all. But likely, there's injustice around you, and your voice, your time, maybe your resources, can be used to pursue justice. This is at the heart of our faith, doing justice. And we can't wash our hands of the responsibility. We're not going to fix all the injustices, and we can't fix injustice with injustice, but we can't ignore it. And Pilate was there, and he was more concerned about his well-being than an innocent man being executed. And yet this is the temptation that comes our way, just to wash our hands, let someone else handle it. We need wisdom to know when to speak and when to be silent. We need wisdom to know we can't fix injustice with injustice. At the same time, God's positioned us to do justice, biblical justice, right where he's planted us. And while this is all happening, while Peter's having his moment and Pilate's having his moment, you have Jesus in this moment doing exactly what Isaiah prophesied in chapter 53. He went like a sheep to the shearers and didn't open his mouth. I mean, we read that several times in chapter 27. He's not trying to defend himself. And here Jesus, not defending himself, endures such injustice, such brutality. He's mocked, insulted, tortured, executed. And every step along the way, injustice took place. But he remained silent because it was his enduring of injustice that would give the gift to every one of us, this gift of being just and right before God. He goes to the cross, pays our sin debt. And friends, oftentimes we only tell half the story. He goes to the cross. We'll keep telling. This is very important. Easter, we're going to tell the story. We're going to share the good news. Because people need to know that, Jesus has made it possible. He lived the life that you and I could never have lived. He lived a sinless life. And he died the death that he shouldn't have died. He died the death that we should have died. He paid our sin debt on the cross so that we could be forgiven, so that all shame and all guilt could be lifted off of us. But not just that. Yes, the guilt and the shame and the sin, the stain of sin that we even sang about this morning, that we've been made white as snow. All that lifted off of us, but something is put on us. What's put on us is the righteousness of God. The good news of the gospel is not only are you forgiven of your sin, past, present, future, but Jesus, he takes his righteousness and puts it on you. So that in Christ, you are not only forgiven, you are justified. Romans chapter 5, Paul picks this up very well in Romans chapter 5. He writes, therefore, since we've been made right in God's sight by faith, we have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us. Because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand, and we confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory. He went silent to the cross, suffered injustice. He didn't try and fix injustice with injustice. And God the Father didn't wash his hands of pursuing justice. He actually meted out justice on his Son so that you could have peace with God. So how do we respond? We face injustice. Well, we can't perpetuate violence. We have to sheath our sword. How much pain has our world experienced because the sword has been unsheathed? And we can't ignore our responsibility that we have to play in doing justice. We also remember that there is a God who sent his Son to pursue justice for us. And let me just wrap up. I just want to make a few points that we could apply to our lives today from this way of the cross story, the unfair way. First, I want to talk to those of you who are in the room who you would not say that you are a Christian. You're here, maybe because you're just trying to figure God out. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for trusting us and for being here. Maybe you're in the beginning of a journey. Maybe you've been journeying for a while, or maybe you're watching on live stream. I'm glad you're doing that. Maybe you're listening to a podcast as you're in a car somewhere driving. Can I just say this to you? If you're not a Christian, if you genuinely care about justice, you should want Christianity to be true. If you genuinely care about justice, you should want this to be true. Here's what I mean by that. See, oftentimes what happens is we say, well, there's so much suffering and injustice in the world. How can I believe that there's a God? And can I just say to you that if anyone had the right to not believe in God because of the injustice that they went through, it was Jesus. Yet he kept his eyes on his Father the entire way. And also say this, that the Christian faith is centered on righteousness and justice and pursuing justice and doing justice for others. The Christian faith at its roots teaches that all men and women, regardless of their class, no classism, regardless of their status in society, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race, have inherent value before God, and they are made in the image of God. This is the Christian faith. And the Christian faith is that anytime that's violated, we should do justice and make sure that doesn't happen. We should pursue justice for the oppressed. We should pursue help for the hungry, clothing the naked. By the way, this is why we'd want to be involved in doing Salem free clinics and providing health care for people who don't have health care. It's an injustice. We want people to have health care and mental health care and dental care. And that's why we do that. This is why we feed the hungry. This is why we do so many things around this place, because this is central to the Christian faith. And if you're seeking and you're trying to figure that you're not sure about Christianity, if you genuinely care about justice, you should want all this to be true, because here's why. See, the karmic religions teach that if you're suffering and you're enduring unfair treatment, you're only getting what's coming to you. And you're going to be reincarnated thousands of times until that debt is paid. Here's the good news about Christianity. Your debt has been paid. You don't get what you deserve. You get grace. You get forgiveness, and you get the righteousness of God. But the karmic religions teach that you're just going to pay, and eventually you're going to be absorbed in the great oneness of the Spirit of the universe, and you will lose your individuality and your personhood. Not so for those who follow our Christ. We will have a new heaven and a new earth, and you will retain your individuality, and it'll be a physical earth. We'll still eat. Amen. Right? And by the way, can I just say, if you would put yourself in the category of secularist or agnostic or atheistic, can I just say to you that you have no grounds to complain against injustice? Because that worldview says the strong eat the weak. So if someone is being oppressed, that's the worldview just being worked out. If there is war, that's just the worldview of the strong, the survival of the fittest. That's just the implications of that worldview. You have no ground to stand on about complaining about injustice. In fact, what you're doing is you're smuggling in values from other faith systems to your faith system. And if you have to smuggle that stuff in, you should question your own worldview and perspective. Because if you genuinely care about justice, you should want this to be true. Yes, Christians have made all kinds of mistakes in church history. Yes, the church has made significant blunders. We have unsheathed our sword and caused all kinds of pain. But our Christ said, put it back. And if you care about justice, I'm just saying, don't import Christianity into your worldview. Be honest. Consider the facts. And my prayer is that hopefully one day you'll embrace the great reality that there is a Christ who made it possible for you to not get what you deserve, but to get way more than you deserve, we deserve, I deserve, because of what he accomplished for us. Second thing I want to just say as we sort of end our time together is, are we having a Peter or Pilate moment in any way? Am I in any way trying to fix injustice with injustice? Are you shaming anyone on the internet? Are you demeaning, demonizing, or dehumanizing anyone in your attempt to pursue justice? We've got to put our sword away. Am I washing my hands of any injustice? Has God positioned me? Could my voice make a difference? Could my resources, my time, pursue biblical justice? Are you having a Peter or Pilate moment anyway? And last, let me just say this. Remember that every injustice on earth is recorded in heaven, and one day every wrong will be made right by a just judge. Many injustices will be addressed, thank God. Some will have to endure. But there's coming a day when the just judge will solve all injustices. 1 Peter chapter 2, Laura led us in some meditation on this. It says, Jesus, when he was reviled, did not revile in return when he suffered. He did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Jesus trusted the Father to make things right in the end. Christ is our reward. And hopefully we'll see justice increase. But we look to that day when justice will be served. I mentioned our nation's history and in the dark days of slavery when brutality was being unleashed on African Americans. As they thought about the future, there was very little to hope in. You may be aware that many songs were written as they thought of entrusting themselves to a God who would make things right one day. I want you to listen to some of the words that were sung. This song called Heaven's My Home. It says, I am on a pilgrim journey of sorrow. I'm left in this whole wide world. I'm left in this wide world alone. I have no hope for tomorrow. But I've started to make heaven my home. Well, sometimes I am tossed. Sometimes I am driven low. Sometimes, my dear Lord, I don't know to which way I can roam. But I've heard of a city called heaven. And I've started to make heaven my home. And a more well-known spiritual song written in those days, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for me to carry me home. I looked over Jordan. What did I see? A band of angels coming for me, coming to carry me home. And it sustained some Christ followers in the darkest of days, where there was no hope. Friends, sometimes injustice comes our way. Can't fix it with injustice. Can't wash our hands of it. But we can remember there's a God who will make every wrong right. Let's pray together. So Jesus, we simply just ask you the question, guys, what do you want us to know about you today? How do you want to reveal yourself to us today? Oh, Father, there are some in the room who need comfort. You are the God of the grieving. It doesn't feel right. You are the God of those who have encountered loss. And God who mourns with those who mourn. Smoldering wick you will not snuff out. A bruised reed you will not break. Jesus, how do you want us responding to you today? And whatever that might look like, we ask for your presence. Because, Lord, whatever comes our way, our hearts are set on your heart. We trust you. We love you. And we want to be faithful in following you. We pray this in your name. Amen.